In a quiet gallery of the Louvre stands a stela of carved limestone, broken and incomplete, its surface worn by more than 4,000 years. On one side, a god holds a great net filled with the bodies of captured enemies. On the other, a king in a long woolen garment rides at the head of a phalanx of soldiers, their overlapping shields forming a wall, the bodies of the fallen crushed beneath their feet. Above them, vultures wheel in the sky, carrying severed heads and limbs in their beaks. These fragments are all that are left of what once must have been a truly magnificent object, what we today call the Stele of the Vultures. It's one of the oldest war monuments in human history. The battle it commemorates was fought around 2450 BC between two small city-states in what's now southern Iraq. By the time the stela was carved, the war between those two city-states was already generations old. It would continue, on and off, for another century after. And the city-state that raised this monument, the city-state whose king is shown trampling his enemies, whose god is shown crushing them in his net, was, for nearly 200 years, one of the most powerful states in the ancient Sumerian world. That city was Lagash. Sharing a portion of the fertile floodplain with it was the city of Umma, Lagash's age-old rival. Most surviving documents and monuments, such as the Stele of the Vultures, describe Umma's many defeats and humiliation at the hands of the seemingly all-powerful Lagash. As we'll see, this was not always the case with Lagash. Soon, tragedy would befall both. By 2900 BC, the southern Mesopotamian plain, the long, flat alluvial corridor between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, was studded with several city-states, some of them with tens of thousands of inhabitants, surrounded by tall, defensive walls, and fed by vast networks of irrigation canals that turned the desert into productive farmland. It was also the beginning of the era that historians call the early dynastic period of Sumer. These 6 centuries, between roughly 2900 to 2334 BC, were ones where competing city-states jostled for land, water, trade routes, and divine favor. Each city was home of a god. Uruk belonged to Eannatum, goddess of love and war, though the great god An also had his main sanctuary there. Ur belonged to Nanna, god of the moon. To Enki, lord of sweet water and wisdom, belonged Eridu. The chief deity of the Sumerians, Enlil, lived in Nippur. And Lagash, whose capital was the city of Girsu, belonged to Ningirsu, whose name means Lord of Girsu, and was a god of farming and war. Quite appropriate for a city such as Lagash. A Sumerian city-state's ruler was generally called either an ensi, a word meaning steward, and that was generally used for a governor or a minor king, or, if he was a really powerful individual, a lugal, meaning big man. A lugal may have had jurisdiction over several cities. The human leader of each city-state was its patron deity's earthly representative, and his responsibilities included managing the city-state's temples, canals, and defense. When kings went to war, they went into battle on behalf of their god. When boundaries were drawn between cities, they were drawn, in theory, between the gods of the respective warring cities. Those, though, were heaven's boundaries. On Earth, this boundary was generally created by a ditch or waterway, such as a canal or river tributary. Unlike most city-states, Lagash was not a single city, but a state comprising of 3 urban centers. Girsu, the political and spiritual capital, which sat to the north, the urban center of Lagash, which gave the state its name, and Nina Serrara, a smaller cult center to the south. Watered by branches of the Tigris River, threaded with canals, and positioned advantageously near the head of the Persian Gulf and trade routes that ran east into Elam and south to the sea, Lagash soon became a very wealthy place. About 15 to 20 miles northwest across the floodplain lay Lagash's rival, the city-state of Umma. Unfortunately, most of what we know about Umma comes from inscriptions and records of its enemy, Lagash, so those accounts are likely very biased. Even so, Umma appears to have been powerful enough to challenge Lagash and its rulers for centuries. Lagash's early political history remains largely mysterious. Some of its early major political events were recorded centuries later on a fascinating document known as the Enmetena Cone. Dating to around 2400 BC, the text on it describes a conflict that was already underway some 200 years earlier, namely a border dispute between Lagash and Umma over a fertile stretch of farmland called the Gu'edena. The inscriptions on the Enmetena Cone preserve one of the most detailed diplomatic and military accounts from early Mesopotamian history and provide valuable information about the early rulers of Lagash. Part of this remarkable text reads, Enlil, the king of all lands and the father of all the gods, by his unalterable command, fixed the border between the god Ningirsu of Lagash and the god Shara of Umma. Masilim, the great king of Kish, acting upon the oracle of the god Ishtaran, measured out the boundary field with a surveying line and erected a stone stela at that spot. In later years, Ush, the ruler of Umma, acted with supreme arrogance. He treated the words of the treaty as something to be ignored, violently ripped up the boundary stela, and marched his forces directly into the fertile plain of Lagash. Ningirsu, the ultimate warrior of Enlil, fought against Umma under righteous command. Following Enlil's decree, Ningirsu cast his great battle net over the invaders. He thoroughly defeated them, and their burial mounds were piled up high across the open desert. Eannatum, the ruler of Lagash and ancestor of Enmetena, alongside Enakale, the ruler of Umma, eventually remeasured and fixed the line of that very boundary field. While the Enmetena Cone explicitly frames this early border dispute as an intervention by Masilim, Lugal, or king of the city of Kish, further to the north, it noticeably leaves out the name of Lagash's local ruler. For a long time, this was a mystery, until archaeologists unearthed a ceremonial stone mace head dedicated by Masilim himself that read, Masilim, Lugal of Kish, who built the temple of Ningirsu, brought this mace head and dedicated it to the god Ningirsu, while Lugal Shah Engur was serving as the Ensi of Lagash. The inscription on this artifact reveals that the ruler of Lagash at the time was a man named Lugal Shah Engur. So, why did the later ruler Enmetena leave him out of the story? The answer likely lies in royal propaganda. Lugal Shah Engur ruled a few generations before Enmetena's own family came to power, meaning he was not a direct ancestor. More importantly, he didn't rule as an independent king. Instead, he appears to have been an Ensi, a governor or local prince who was subordinate to Masilim of Kish. By omitting Lugal Shah Engur, Enmetena effectively rewrote history, erasing a period when Lagash may have been politically weak and subject to a foreign overlord. The memory of Masilim's intervention and the boundary stone he placed between Lagash and Umma would continue to shape the conflict for the next 300 years. We'll come back to the inscription on the Enmetena cone later for more details on the Lagash-Umma border dispute. The first ruler of Lagash we can truly put a face to was Enmetena's ancestor, a man named Ur-Nanshe, who came to the throne around 2500 BC. Because he's the first independent ruler of Lagash who we have a name for, he's been given the honor by scholars of being the founder of Lagash's first dynasty. A famous limestone relief, now housed in the Louvre, shows him engaged in one of the activities most associated with Mesopotamian kingship, carrying a basket of mud bricks on his head as he helps to consecrate a new temple. The same plaque also shows his sons, along with their names. Ur-Nanshe's inscriptions proudly list the temples he built, the canals he dug, the divine statues he commissioned, and the walls he raised around the city. All the achievements he hoped future generations would remember him for. The inscription on his most famous plaque reads, Ur-Nanshe, the king of Lagash, son of Gu'edena, and descendant of Gursar. He built the temple of Ningirsu. He built the Lesser Absu shrine, and he built the temple of Nanshe. Ur-Nanshe, the king of Lagash. The ships of Dilmun brought timber to him as tribute from the foreign lands. Since quality timber was scarce in the deserts and marshlands surrounding Lagash, this inscription, if accurate, suggests that by 2500 BC, the city had become well-connected and wealthy enough to participate in long-distance maritime trade networks stretching across the Persian Gulf. Another document outlining Ur-Nanshe's temple-building frenzy reads, Ur-Nanshe, king of Lagash, son of Gu'edena, grandson of Gursar, built the Bagara temple with baked bricks and completed it. He built the Ebgal and the temple of the goddess Nanshe. He built the shrine of Girsu, Kinir, the temple of the goddess Gatumdug, Tirash, and Ningar. He built the temple of the goddess Ninmar, the Edom, the Kame, and the Absu. He also built the wall of Lagash and dug the Saman Canal. Based on these and other inscriptions, it's apparent that Ur-Nanshe was quite the builder. But that's not all. Some of these same documents, like the one I just read, make it known that Ur-Nanshe was also a great warrior. The reverse side of the same document reads, Ur-Nanshe, king of Lagash, captured the men of Ur and the men of Umma who had come against him. The men of Lagash defeated the men of Ur in battle. He captured the governor of Magur, as well as Amabarasi, the chief seal-bearer. He also captured Papursag, along with another commander. The men of Umma were defeated in battle. Ur-Nanshe captured Lupa and Bilalala, both commanders, as well as Pabil Galtuku, ruler of Umma, and Urpusag, another commander. He also captured Hursag Shama, the chief merchant. Umma appears again in inscriptions from Lagash, and by the time of Ukurgal, the son and successor of Ur-Nanshe, around 2465 BC, another round of battle with Umma and its king, Ush, commenced. What we know about the battle comes largely from the famous Stele of the Vultures. But time has not been kind to the monument. Large portions of the Stele have been broken away, and many of its inscriptions survive only in fragments. Scholars have worked to reconstruct the surviving text, attempting to preserve as much of its original meaning and tone as possible, despite the many gaps. What follows is one modern reconstruction of the inscription, and it goes something like this. The ruler of Umma violated the agreements concerning the borderlands and encroached upon the territory of Lagash, the fertile plain of Gu'edena, beloved land of the god Ningirsu. Then, Eannatum, mighty ruler of Lagash, son of Akurgal and descendant of Ur-Nanshe, rose up against Umma. Ningirsu, the great warrior of Enlil, called out in wrath against the men of Umma because they had transgressed the rightful border and seized the beloved fields of Lagash. Eannatum marched forth under the command of Ningirsu. The god rejoiced in him and granted him strength. The goddess Inanna stood beside him in battle, while the great gods of Sumer upheld his cause. Other than a mention here, very little is known about Akurgal, except that he was the father of Eannatum, perhaps the most famous warrior king of early dynastic Sumer. It was also during Eannatum's reign that the Stele of the Vultures was commissioned to recount these events, at least from the perspective of Lagash. In another part of the Stele, Eannatum tells us that he wasn't simply born, but divinely created. This section reads, "The warrior god Ningirsu, the champion of Enlil, looked down upon the crisis. He planted the seed of Eannatum in the womb. The mother goddess Ninhursag rejoiced. She welcomed the newborn baby onto her righteous knees and offered him her sacred right breast to nurse. Eannatum grew to a massive size. Ningirsu measured him and found him to be 5 cubits tall, with shoulders spanning 5 cubits and a single span. In absolute joy, Ningirsu bestowed upon him kingship of Lagash. The goddess Inanna took him by the side and named him, saying, 'He is the one worthy of the Ebgal temple.' The god Enki gave him vast intelligence, and the goddess Nanshe chose him from her heart. Eannatum was commanded to destroy the enemies of the gods." A height of 5 cubits means that Eannatum was roughly 9 feet tall, or more than 2.5 meters. He was presented as a superhuman champion, created for one purpose: to right the wrongs and recover what Umma had taken. We're also told that Eannatum led his soldiers in person, riding in a chariot drawn by onagers at the head of his troops, and then on foot, leading a phalanx of bristling spears, as depicted on one of the Stele's fragments. He was also wounded by an arrow, but he did not fall. The army of Umma was eventually defeated on the battlefield, and those who fled were relentlessly chased back to their home city by Eannatum and his men. The Stele tells us, "Eannatum pursued the survivors all the way to the gates of the city of Umma. He captured its elite, executed its rebellious leaders, and cast them down like dust. He then remeasured the sacred frontier line, reclaiming the entire Gu'edena plain from the hands of Umma. He restored the territory back to its true divine master, the god Ningirsu. He marked out the lines of the great public estates, establishing the permanent boundaries for the Bara field, the Gesh-Uga field, and the shared agricultural Canal networks. Eannatum cast the great battle net of Enlil, the king of heaven and earth, before the leader of Umma. The leader of Umma swore this oath: 'By the life of Enlil, I shall gracefully graze the fields of Lagash, but I will never cross the boundary dike of Ningirsu. I will never alter his canals, and I will never knock down his stone monuments. If I ever break this promise, may the great battle net of Enlil, from which no mortal can escape, swoop down from above and ensnare the city of Umma.' To seal this contract, Eannatum released 2 ritual doves into the sky toward the city of Nippur, their eyes painted with sacred cosmetics. In addition to Enlil, Ush, the king of Umma, swore similar oaths before the deities Ninhursag, Enki, Nana, Utu, and Ninki, promising that he would not violate the agreement. But Eannatum wasn't just defending his home borders. He was also an expansionist. The final columns of the Stele of the Vultures tell us, Eannatum, king of Lagash, the one granted strength by Enlil, fed fine milk by Ninhursag, given a good name by Inanna, granted wisdom by Enki, chosen in her heart by Ur-Nanshe, the powerful lady, Ningirsu's subjugator of foreign lands, defeated Elam and Subartu, lands of wood and treasure, defeated Susa, defeated the city of Ur. Archaeologists over the years have found several other inscriptions of Eannatum describing his accomplishments as king of Lagash. One of them, on an object called Eannatum's Boulder, and now in the Louvre, reads, Eannatum, the Ensi of Lagash, who was granted physical might by the god Enlil, nourished with the true milk of the goddess Ninhursag, chosen by name by the warrior god Ningirsu, and chosen from the heart by the goddess Ur-Nanshe, the son of Ukurgal, the Ensi of Lagash. He smote the foreign land of Elam with weapons. He smote the city of Urua with weapons. He smote Umma with weapons. And he smote Ur with weapons. How much of this was true and how much was royal exaggeration is impossible to know, since we have no independent records confirming Eannatum's foreign conquests. But if the inscriptions are even partly accurate, then Lagash may have been the most powerful state in all of Sumer at the time. Upon Eannatum's death, his brother, Eannatum I, took the throne, and almost immediately the trouble with Umma began again. The new ruler there, Ur-Lumma, recruited mercenaries from foreign lands, smashed the boundary stones, and marched into disputed territory once more. The Eannatum, which we referenced earlier, tells us, despite this treaty, the people of Umma unlawfully ate the grain harvest belonging to the goddess Ur-Nanshe and the god Ningirsu, racking up an immense debt of 1 guru measure. Because they could not pay back the interest on this grain, which had ballooned over the years to an impossible fine of 144,000 guru, Ur-Lumma, the next ruler of Umma, chose violence. He intentionally diverted water away from the sacred boundary dikes of Ningirsu and Ur-Nanshe, threw the stone monuments into the fire to destroy them, smashed the shrines of the gods to pieces, and tore down the sacred chapels. He then gathered foreign mercenaries from other lands and crossed the border to invade Lagash. Eannatum, the ruler of Lagash, engaged them in battle at the Ugiga field, the sacred territory of Ningirsu. Enmatena, the beloved son of Eannatum, advanced to strike a decisive blow. This is where the text becomes especially interesting. It's also the last time we hear of Eannatum I. According to this section of the Enmatena, when King Ur-Lumma of Umma launched a major invasion of Lagash, Eannatum I marched out to confront him in battle. Then, quite abruptly, he disappears from the narrative. That's quite significant. In Mesopotamian royal propaganda, whether Sumerian, Babylonian, or Assyrian, kings almost never admitted to defeat in their inscriptions. Earlier sections of this and other texts from Lagash proudly describe enemy casualties and victories in vivid detail, yet no such triumphs are claimed for Eannatum I. Because of this, many historians suspect the text is concealing a military disaster. Eannatum I likely lost the battle, and possibly his life. None of these details are given in the text, which then introduces Eannatum's son, Enmatena, telling us, Eannatum, the beloved son of Eannatum, advanced to strike a decisive blow. He completely broke Ur-Lumma, forcing him to flee for his life. Ur-Lumma escaped back into the heart of the city of Umma, where he was trapped and executed by his own people. Eannatum left the bodies of Ur-Lumma's fallen soldiers scattered across the plains, packing their skeletal remains into 5 massive, separate burial mounds. Ur-Lumma was succeeded by his nephew, a man named Il, who had been the chief administrator of the temple at Zabala, one of Umma's secondary cities. Il tried the same gambit. He diverted the boundary canals and sought to claim the disputed land, which is recorded on the Eannatum cone. Part of the relevant section reads, Il seized the kingship of Umma for himself. He then ignored the boundary ditch of Ningirsu and Ur-Nanshe, and the boundary ditch of Ningirsu which extended to the banks of the Tigris River near Girsu. He drained the water from the chapels of Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag. He withheld the repayment of the 36,000 guru measures of grain owed to Lagash. This new king of Umma, Il, like his predecessor, was proving to be a menace. Eannatum tried to reason with him, but to no avail. The inscription on the cone continues. Eannatum, ruler of Lagash, repeatedly sent envoys regarding that ditch, but Il, the ruler of Umma, claimed the fields for himself, speaking words of wickedness. The boundary ditch of Ningirsu and the boundary ditch of Ur-Nanshe are mine, he claimed. I will control the territory from the Antasura shrine to the temple of Dim Galabzu. But Enlil and Ninhursag did not grant this to him. Again, this is another section where we have to read between the lines. The passage ends simply by stating that Enlil and Ninhursag did not grant this to him, implying that Il may not have achieved his objective. Yet once again, we hear of no major victory from Lagash, something that surely would have been celebrated in the inscriptions had it occurred. Because of this, many scholars believe the conflict likely ended in a stalemate. As for Eannatum, he would go on to rule Lagash, constructing more temples and canals, and concluding a treaty with Lugal-Kigini Dudu, the earliest known diplomatic alliance in Mesopotamian history. He also dedicated a beautiful silver vase to the god Ningirsu, inscribed with the name of his priest, which still survives to this day. After the reign of Eannatum, the archaeological record grows much quieter, leaving us with only limited information about his successor, Eannatum II. After him, the first dynasty of Lagash appears to have come to an end under mysterious circumstances. For reasons we can no longer fully reconstruct, the throne eventually passed out of the family of Ur-Nanshe and into the hands of a priest named Enantarzi, who had previously served as the chief administrator of Ningirsu's temple at Girsu. How this transition occurred is unclear, but Enantarzi was later succeeded by a ruler named Lugal-Landa. In later tradition, fairly or unfairly, Lugal-Landa became remembered as the very image of a corrupt king. He was accused of taxing weddings and funerals, turning temple lands into private estates for his own family, and burdening the population with such crushing debts that, according to one tradition, parents were forced to sell their children into slavery in order to survive. The once prosperous city of Lagash, which had benefited greatly from its strategic position between the Persian Gulf and Elam, was portrayed at this time in later texts as an oppressive and deeply exploitative state whose people were being driven into ruin. Yet, not all was lost. Out of this crisis emerged a man named Urukagina. According to one commonly used chronology, he ruled from about 2351 to 2342 BC, a reign of only 9 years. Urukagina never names his father in his inscriptions, which is unusual and has led some historians to suspect that he may have been a usurper. Whatever his origins, he appears to have been the ruler Lagash needed at that moment. He introduced a series of reforms and decrees aimed at relieving the suffering of the population and curbing abuses of power. These reforms survive on inscribed clay cones and a remarkable stone disc. The texts describe in vivid detail the corruption that supposedly existed before his reign. One inscription of Urukagina, written on a clay cone from Girsu, now in the Louvre, reads, Urukagina held close to the word which his king, Ningirsu, spoke to him. He banned the man in charge of the boatmen from seizing the boats. He banned the head of the shepherds from seizing the donkeys and sheep. He banned the man in charge of the fisheries from seizing the fisheries. Urukagina secured the citizens of Lagash from usury, debt slavery, inventory taxes, theft, and murder. He established their freedom. He made a covenant with Ningirsu that the powerful man would not mistreat the orphan or the widow. According to such inscriptions, tax collectors were dismissed, debts were cancelled, and widows and orphans were protected from powerful officials who preyed upon them. The Sumerians even had a remarkable word for what Urukagina claimed to restore, amargi, literally meaning return to the mother, though scholars often translate it imperfectly as freedom. It specifically meant freedom from debt. Unfortunately for Lagash, the reforms were not enough to save either the city or its people from decline. The internal troubles of the state seem to have weakened it considerably, giving its old rival, Umma, the opportunity of a lifetime. Around 2340 BC, a new ruler came to the throne of Umma, Lugal-Zaghazi. In the second year of his reign, Lugal-Zaghazi launched an attack against the city-state of Lagash. One surviving tablet describing these events tells us, the leader of Umma set fire to the Ekibira. He set fire to the Antasura and bundled off its precious metals and lapis lazuli. He plundered the palace of Tirash. He plundered the Abzubanda. He plundered the chapels of Enlil and Utu. The leader of Umma, having sacked Lagash, has committed a sin against Ningirsu. The hand which he has raised against him will be cut off. It is not the sin of Urukagina, king of Girsu. Menesaba, the goddess of Lugal-Zaghazi, ruler of Umma, make him bear the sin. That last curse, as it turned out, was answered. Lugal-Zaghazi went on to proclaim himself king of all of Sumer, boasting on a votive vase at Nippur that, from the lower sea along the Tigris and Euphrates to the upper sea, Enlil granted him no rival. It's the earliest known claim to anything resembling a Mesopotamian empire, though archaeologists have found no other evidence that Lugal-Zaghazi was in control of such a vast swath of territory, from the Persian Gulf all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Within 25 years, Lugal-Zaghazi himself was led in a wooden neckstock to the gate of Enlil at Nippur, a prisoner of a king who had risen seemingly out of nowhere and now claimed universal rule. That king called himself Sharukin, meaning legitimate king. We know him better as Sargon of Akkad. With Sargon's conquest of Sumer around 2334 BC, Lugal-Zaghazi's reign came to an end, as did Umma's brief moment of glory and the early dynastic period itself. By 1500 BC, the two rival cities had been abandoned. Their temples had crumbled. Their canals had silted up, and their kings had long since turned to dust. Memory of them preserved in stone or on clay tablets, allowing us, more than 4,000 years later, to get a glimpse of one of humanity's earliest recorded rivalries. So I hope that you learned a bit more about this fascinating region during this incredibly fascinating time. There's a lot more on the way, so please be sure to subscribe. And thanks for watching. I'd also like to thank the channel's patrons for making videos like this possible. These include, but are certainly not limited to, GrandKick69, Yap de Graaf, Pasta Frola, Michael Lewis, Daniel Allen, Danny Van Eck, Wanix TV, Robert Morgan, Strobex, Blitzkrieg, Krishnan Murali, Frank, Tim Lane, Sebastian Otaro Korea, Michael Trudell, Leader Titan, Micah G, John Scarberry, William O'Brien, Julie Aguirre, Andrew Bomer, Connor Dolson, Krish, Ben Reisvik, David R, Stephen Ball, Gabe, Monty Grimes, Franz Robbins, Cyrus Mir, Diane Astra, Nimrod Nir, Hypno San, Brendan Redman, Faridun Darachanji, Jimmy Daruwala, Anahita Debu, Gulistan Debu, Shanaz Kama, Farhad Kama, and all of the channel's patrons on Patreon for helping to support this and all future content. Check out the benefits to being a Patreon member, and if you'd like to join, feel free to click the link in the video description. You can also follow History with Sai on Instagram, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter, as well as continue to listen to special audio programs on the History with Sai podcast. Thanks again, and stay safe.